We can do it. Yes, we can. We can change things throughout the land, but we all must lend a hand. We can do it. Oh, yes, we can. Oh, your neighbor over there, a bit bewildered, but he cares.
Welcome to Changing Our World. We're revisiting a former guest, Brian Longan, who last time we saw him had just returned from doing a Peace Corps 2-year tour in Dominica in the Caribbean. And he was at the time, having returned to the U.S., working for Hands Across the Sea. He was providing books for libraries throughout the Caribbean, and especially in Dominica, where I was able to supply a few books because he sent a note to his mother and his grandmother saying, send books, and they all told all their friends, and we sent books down. But he was running it here in the U.S. Well, what did he do next?
When I finished my service in the Peace Corps, I did accept the job for Hands Across the Sea, and I worked for them for about half a year before deciding to go back to graduate school, where I am now an international development student in New York City.
And what does that mean, international development?
Well, at the school, I'm focusing on cities and social justice. So we learn about urbanization of the developing world and the problems that ensue due to that urban growth.
And growth. So you're there studying it all intellectually. So you need some hands-on experience, right? And they have internships. Does everyone there have an internship?
Well, New School University has an international field program where students from all around the university will apply to programs in 5 to 10 countries around the world where they work with the university to set up an internship and live in that country for the summer in between your first and second year of the graduate program.
Okay, so where'd you choose to go?
I, as a urbanization student, chose Uganda, Africa, where they're urbanizing at the fastest rate we have ever seen, which is about 6% per year.
People are just pouring into the city?
Whether or not it's people migrating to the cities or it's natural birth from rapid population growth of people that have already been there. People are now living in cities for the first time in Africa and are hoping to reap the benefits that come from those cities.
So you get off the plane in
Kampala is the capital of Uganda.
Did you have culture shock?
Not as much as you would expect. Having, I had a significant experience in the developing world before. I was it was remarkable to me how similar the Caribbean was to actually Eastern Africa, having both been English colonies and the architecture very much the same, except for the fact that Africa, the population levels are at a whole nother extreme.
So it wasn't that crowded in Dominica?
It was very uncrowded in Dominica, and it was extremely dense in Uganda.
So there were traffic jams and stuff like that?
In Uganda, the traffic is pretty insane.
What work were you set up with there?
I was matched up with an organization called Act Together Uganda. They're a support NGO to the National Slum Dwellers Federation of Uganda, which was one of about 35 federations that have been set up around the world from an Indian organization called Slum Dwellers International. So Slum Dwellers International is this umbrella organization to these federations that exist across the world. And
it's so funny to just accept the title slum dweller. I mean, I was shocked when you first used that word.
The academic community, professional community is moving towards informal settlements. It's not on the books economy. I was just as surprised as you to hear these Ugandans refer to themselves as slum dwellers, so I prefer to refer to them however they'd like to be called.
Yeah, if they're comfortable with it, we should use it.
These words that we kind of create to describe them, well.
And so what is this Slum Dwellers organization trying to do?
They try to mobilize the urban poor across the developing world, whether or not it's South America, Africa, Southeast Asia. They mobilize the urban poor communities in major capital cities and secondary cities across countries to create community savings groups and establish new forms of funds and ways to access capital to develop infrastructure in their communities.
It's partly money that the slum dwellers give.
They save very little amounts of money, but it accumulates very quickly. So if you can imagine in Kampala, where 60% of the population lives in slums, 1.6 million people, if they were all to save a very small amount of money, over a year it turns into a very large amount of money.
And are there outside donators as well?
Well, yeah, international organizations across the world support infrastructure projects, but if the urban poor and people who reside in these countries are able to contribute to these projects, it would seemingly become more sustainable.
So what kinds of projects do they want to accomplish?
For the most part, in East Africa, it's housing, it's water and sanitation, ways to make these communities less susceptible to natural disasters or extreme events. They're all lacking basic and adequate housing and sanitation. And for them to improve that, it would help them improve their overall public health and the betterment of the entire communities. And for the first time, these world investors, corporations from around the world, see these African cities as new emerging markets. So if you're able to better these communities, in turn, there should be more investment from international organizations.
60%. So does that mean that the rich are over here and the whole city is poor? How does it work?
Yeah, well, they say the U.S. is the most unequal country around, but you can really see the massive disparity between the people of Uganda. You see these very rich people living next to the very poorest people. And actually, I've studied a lot of Nairobi, Kenya as well, and you see massive slums with no water adjacent to golf courses that use all the water the country has.
Oh my God.
Which is a pretty crazy juxtaposition.
And the poor people don't go and hold out there.
No.
I bet they're not allowed on the
No, they're most definitely not.
Oh my God. So you walk into this situation where 60% of the city is slums and they're trying to organize and improve things. And what was your role?
So again, I'm working with an organization called Act Together, and they support the National Slum Dwellers Federation of Uganda. Myself and a team of 3 other students from New School University. I'm an international development student. I was with another international development student, an architecture student, and an urban policy student.
Okay.
We, as a team of 4, were working on a Kaseni land sharing project, which is an initiative to provide affordable housing in a center city slum.
Most of the slums, I understand, are like on the hills around the city?
Right.
And skyscrapers.
When the city began sprawling, all of the center city valuable land has by now almost been completely evicted. The people have been sent to the periphery or the urban edge, as a lot of people refer to it.
And not given any money or anything, right? They just
no, they're
go
pushed, and they're pushed to places where they can't afford to commute to work, and they're even more lacking infrastructure than before. However, there are still a few slums within Kampala, and I'm sure across Africa, that are still existing in the center city, where the land is extremely valuable. So the project we were working on is a redevelopment scheme where we can keep the slum dwellers on the land and attract new investors and come up with a partnership where they all share the land.
How can you do that?
It's a very complex system in Africa. There's a lot of hurdles and obstacles to clear for successful development projects. And in Uganda's case, in much of Africa, one of those constraints is land tenure, defining ownership of the land between the people who have always loaned the land and the people who have resided and now squatted on the land for many years. Yeah. So obtaining and acquiring the land to do these projects is a very difficult problem. Act Together Uganda and Slum Dwellers International were able to identify a landowner within the Kaseni slum of Kampala who doesn't want to evict the tenants and wants to share his land with the squatters who reside there, who he's become part of the community with.
Oh.
Essentially, the landowner would be donating half of his land to a new housing project and keeping half of his land where he would be giving a new home and an income-generating business. We would essentially be taking over half, or not we, excuse me, the Act Together Uganda and
Well,
the
it's
community
very
of
nice
slum
you
dwellers.
identified with them, right? You felt it was your people.
The community
Yeah.
essentially are given the land to own and would develop a housing project that would be financed through a process of cross-subsidization, where the bottom level of the building would be rented at a market rate to commercial businesses or
From all over the world, right?
from
Like telephone company or whatever.
telecom companies, banks, people
Yeah.
who can afford the market value of a center city property in Kampala.
Okay.
And that income generated would then provide subsidies to construct affordable housing units for the slum dwellers who reside there.
They would still live in their neighborhood.
Right.
Would these be in high-rise buildings and they'd live above them, or what are they?
This project is long. It's been going on for a very long time, and we're now getting it moving. There are a lot of aspects to the project. My role within the team was to provide and construct a financial model, a financial projection, and determine the feasibility of the project. So we're able to, with myself and the other students, develop deliverables that these organizations can now take to investors, to interested parties that would like to participate in this
What do you
project.
mean a deliverable? What's that?
Whether or not it's a brochure or a document explaining the project, images created and renderings by an architect, potential
Of what
images
could
of
be
what
there.
could be there.
And this is something that the owner of the land, and did you get to know the slum dwellers? Is this something that sounds good to them?
So these federations that have been set up by Slum Dwellers International are organizations that are completely made up of slum dwellers. So we are working side by side with slum dwellers, getting to know them, understanding better what they need and what they're looking for.
So you went in there and did what?
Yeah, we spent days interviewing federation members, chairmen, people who reside there, people who are working informally, some of these people who are actually the most innovative people I've ever met, who are able to survive off of much less than many humans that I've met. So
Did you enjoy them?
I learned a lot from them. You know, that's what's most intriguing about traveling for me, is learning from these people who have completely different backgrounds than mine.
I mean, you're a suburban Marblehead boy, right? And
Well-
here you are.
I was once a suburban Marblehead boy who moved to the jungle in the Caribbean and then relocated to a new jungle in Manhattan and had a short stop in the jungle of Uganda.
Like, what could you learn from slum dwellers? When I was in Venezuela, we went up and spent a lot of time in the favelas and everything. And I was struck by the energy which they had for making political change. And they were organized, and they had ideas they wanted carried out, and they didn't seem like downtrodden. I wouldn't have ever used that word to describe them.
You know, I think there's a lot to learn about resiliency, and they go through problems every day that they couldn't expect, and they have to overcome those problems. And for them to be able to do it with so little, there's much to learn from them. They're a very vulnerable society. Their lacking infrastructure makes them extremely vulnerable to many different aspects of life. And if they're able to deal with those problems at a very micro level, it should be able to help us develop policies for them and for ourselves at a whole macro level.
You know, what I found is that I think if you feel helpless and futureless, that's one thing. But once you put them into an organization and say, now here's something you have to accomplish, that they have enormous inner resources to draw upon.
Yeah, I agree. It's insane that, like we were saying, we're looking for commercial partners to take part in this project.
Yeah.
Who would rent this property? What I was fascinated to learn while I was in Africa was that in 2000, there were 50 million cell phone connections in Africa. And then by 2012, there were 700 million cell phone connections in Africa. So every slum dweller has 2 cell phones.
2?
They have 2 cell phones. They have one from one plan and one from the other plan, and they're cheaper to contact when you use the same plan, from one plan to the same. So and this technology is leading to things that have never happened before, whether or not it's mobile banking and sending back remittances to rural areas, or whether or not it's just connecting people in new ways. These slums or informal settlements are in touch with business. So what has happened is that these companies, these telecom companies, have reaped massive benefits from their huge urban clientele.
Right, poor urban
and they've
clientele.
lost touch with helping those same clientele that are making these new industries boom.
Right.
So why not have a telecom company come on board and rent out this space, a prime Kampala space where everyone around them is using their products. And you know,
give back.
And like I said before, if this community is able to better themselves, in turn, they'll be able to use those products that these industries are looking to sell.
So do you think that's going to happen? Did it look like it would take place?
I think that this project can serve as a platform. It can serve as a model and a base for future projects to start taking off. You know, land sharing projects are still very seldom across the world. You see them in a few places in Southeast Asia and South America, but they still haven't really taken off in Africa. And it's mainly due to government problems, infrastructure problems.
We once tried to get out of the Dominican Republic, and we went through so many desks with people with stamps, and then you go to the other one and they stamp on top of that stamp, and it took us like an hour to get through the stampers. Is that what the bureaucracy is like there? Is it extremely bureaucratic?
Well, seemingly these African countries have become very decentralized. The policies that have been instructed towards them from Western nations to liberalize their economies, to decentralize their economies, while that is a way to tackle these problems and to make more communities more able to participate in policy and action. It has also created these very complex and chaotic systems. So they're still very much stuck in their roots a little bit. And projects going forward will require more transparency from the government.
You traveled while you were there.
I did some traveling around Uganda and to Rwanda next door.
And this is Rwanda after the massacres.
Yep.
And what did you notice were the differences?
Well, the reason as an urban development student, I was very interested in seeing two cities in two different countries with institutional differences and seeing the physical and social. So
they were all just one big stretch of country with various tribes.
East Africa is a large piece of land that was divided up by colonialists, and Rwanda was a Belgian colony, and Uganda was an English colony. So once the countries were divided, they became very different.
And so what did Rwanda become?
Well, Rwanda unfortunately went through massive conflict, and since then has been redeveloping themselves. And Kigali, Rwanda is a very interesting city to see in comparison to Kampala. I love Kampala, and it is one of my favorite places. It's vibrant, colorful, fun, safe.
And you felt at home there?
I don't know if I felt at home, but I felt welcomed, and I felt safe, and I felt, I thought Kampala is great. However, it is dirty and chaotic and massive problems.
Right.
And huge, a much larger city than Kigali. But when you go to Kigali, you see this very clean, immaculate, beautifully organized, well-kept city. While it also seems to be somewhat of a police state to an extent, they're perfectly clean, and they have even days once a month where every citizen in the city will stop what they're doing and pick up garbage.
But you know what? Underneath that was this incredibly violent, maybe they're like trying to clamp down, whereas has there been, are they divided into tribes in Uganda? Are they at each other's throats too?
Everywhere in Africa. Oh, they're not at each other's throats. There's certainly tensions still that remain. What happened in Rwanda is one of the most unfortunate things that I think has ever happened.
Do you think it could happen in Uganda? Could you see it happening there?
I don't think. I like to hope and think that that something to the magnitude of Rwanda couldn't happen again. Unfortunately, we can't say that for certain, but I would be very surprised to see something like that happen in Uganda, especially after meeting many Ugandans who are very sound, safe, welcoming people.
And you made friends with your boda driver, which is another word for a motorcycle?
Boda boda is the main way to travel around the city. It's a
You repeat the word twice. I'm taking a boda.
Yeah, it's a moto taxi. So you're riding on the back of a motorcycle and you're zipping through the traffic. So if you were in a car, what could take hours could take about 15 minutes on the back of a motorcycle.
Yeah. And he invited you to his home and meet his family?
Yeah, so when I arrived, I wanted to seek a boda driver that I could get to know, who I could become friendly with and make sure it was going to be safe and I could trust him. So we became very friendly over the course of the summer, and he would eventually invite me to his home about 20 minutes outside the city, which was a one-room apartment with his wife and his child. He would take me to his Seventh-day Adventist church, which was an experience reading the Bible under a tree in Uganda.
They didn't have
in
a building?
Ugandan language. They had a building, but they start their service outside and move on inside. But the service wasn't even in English. I had an English translator next to me.
Oh, fun.
So my boda driver was just one shared experience of my summer that had a profound effect on my whole experience.
Okay, so now you're back. You graduate in May.
I graduated in May.
And what are you thinking about for the future?
Well, I have developed a familiarity with Africa, so I'm hoping to contribute in social policy research and economic research for assisting in urban development in Africa, whether or not it's traveling back and living there for a few years or working in Boston, New York, or DC for an international organization.
Now, where do you think this came from? Raised in a suburban, middle-class family, what the heck are you doing where'd you get this wanderlust?
It all just comes from what I said before about meeting new people and learning from them and seeing what the problems that they have and what we don't, and being able to help them.
So you have kind of an altruistic streak, I think, and where did that come from?
Well, I think it's from my family. My family has always been very political, very socially just family, or a socially inclusive family.
Oh, and didn't you always used to give charity for Christmas?
We used to do charities. My mother used to have me do volunteer work. My mother and her mother are both very big fans of the Kennedys, and I think they pushed that onto me. And John F. Kennedy was a big inspiration of mine for joining the Peace Corps, and the Peace Corps has certainly shaped the direction of my whole life. So.
Yeah. A lot of people come back from the Peace Corps and then go into things in America, but they're very changed.
Yeah. I became attached to the developing world and the problems they have to deal with, but also the genuineness of the people and the culture that they have is a very welcoming and warm, and it's nice to experience outside.
And isn't it something of a surprise to feel like when we lived in a little town in Mexico, to feel, I would use the word at home, or welcomed, you might say, but like you're part of the ongoing life in a way that when you walk on a deserted urban street here in the United States, you don't feel embraced as much.
There's something about walking through a village and saying good morning, good afternoon, and good night to every person you see.
Yeah.
And then coming back to Manhattan and not being able to say hello to who you're sitting next to on the subway.
I know. And also, were they always on their cell phones?
You'd be surprised with how much, cell phones have really boomed.
Boomed or exploded, we don't know what. Brian, I've known you since you were a little boy, and I'm very anxious to see what happens to you next. And I'm threatening you with the fact that if you're living in some very distant country, that we will come visit you if we can make it.
Well, thanks for having me, and thank you for letting me continue to share stories with you.
Yeah, well, thanks a lot.
'Cause the problems can all be solved with dedication and a little resolve. Obstacles slowly dissolve when we all just get involved. We can do it. Yes, we can. We can change things throughout the land.